Well, I'm really, really excited to meet with you, Stuart Semple, this evening for our conversation artistic license. Hello, Stuart.
Hello, I'm excited to be here too.
That's very squeaky to begin with.
I know, but that's my excited squeak.
Well, very nice, and I appreciate it. And we're going to launch straight into something that I've been thinking
Okay.
is about a kind of like Robin Hood element to you and your kind of sensibility over the last few years.
Mm.
Not that you're stealing from anyone, of course not, but that you are giving back to essentially like an impoverished art community who've been basically cut out through an elite
Mm.
system. Do you think you've got a
Mm.
bit of a Robin Hood complex?
I don't know if it's that, but I don't like inequality, and I do sort of wholeheartedly believe art is for everybody and always kind of has been before it was sort of taken from us. So I think it kind of comes from that, and just like my own story of not always having access to things, and
Mm.
it's not nice to be excluded. You know, I
No,
don't think artists make stuff. Um, I think artists make stuff from a sense of generosity. They want to put something out there or connect with people or share with it. So it sort of seems very odd.
hmm. I mean, when somebody is very exclusive, when they gain, worldwide fame, for example,
Mm.
it does sometimes seem that there's an element of like cutting off, an element of cutting off and disconnecting from community. Have you observed that in any of your contemporaries? You don't need to name anyone. I'm just interested.
Well, I did notice a shift when I lived in London. So I used to live in East London, and I guess I moved there in the year sort of 2000. So it was a different time. It really was. Shoreditch was amazing, and there's a sense of community and collaboration. Like quite famous artists like Peter Doig had a studio opposite me, and I don't know, Rakib Shaw was underneath, and you could borrow a ladder or go and ask if they had a drill, and that was all right. And then all of a sudden, it kind of changed, and it was kind of like everyone for themselves. People started to get big dealers, and all the numbers changed around it all, and people changed a lot. And yeah, I noticed that.
Hmm. This is in no way a criticism of you, but I do sort of, I've seen and read widely about your perhaps lucrative collaborations and work that you've done as residents in Bulgari. Is it the Bulgari Hotel? And huge commissions, train station in Denver.
Oh, I can tell you about that.
Lots of really, really big things. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer if you think you changed through those collaborations and if
Well,
what that change was.
yeah, I can really speak about that. I mean, before all that, things were very different. It was me and a piece of paper and a stick of charcoal, and because that's all I had. And then you'd start to get asked to do things, and they were inevitably exciting.
Hmm.
If someone like Bulgari asks you if you want to stay in the most opulent hotel in the world for 10 days and paint on their window, I mean, that's the sort of dream, isn't it? In a lot of ways to experience that. And also an interesting surface to paint on. But I don't know if it changed me.
Hmm.
But obviously what I made was for the situation and the environment or whatever. But there are compromises with these things, and that's kind of why I don't really do it anymore.
Hmm.
Bulgaria, I remember, like, well, I'd written, I was doing this whole like countercultural history of London on the window,
Hmm.
and I wrote sex in massive letters because Malcolm McLaren had the sex shop around the corner with Vivienne Westwood, of course, and I wrote sniffing glue, like the punk scene and stuff. And the general manager sort of came over to me at like 3 a.m, was like, what, Stuart, I think maybe you need to take those bits down. And
And
I
did
kind of realised, yeah, and I had to take them off. I just didn't want the fight over it. I started to realise actually that freedom was probably more important than those kind of experiences. But I don't regret that.
I was listening to something about, you on your roller skates around Selfridges after hours. listening to
Yeah,
some.
yeah, okay, so that's a different example. So I was asked to do this big project during freeze at Selfridges, and they sort of asked me how much I wanted or whatever, and I was like, do you know what? Like, I've always dreamt of rollerblading around a department store when it's closed, and that would be more valuable to me than getting paid. So they sorted that out, and I got to do that, and like, I'll never forget that.
A legacy almost also. I mean, the experience sounds amazing, have to say. Like, when I heard that, I was like, I'm so jealous of that. Forget about all the famous art and art making. It's the rollerblading around Selfridges that I want.
Yeah.
But is there also like almost like a legacy in that for you of a kind of nostalgic thing, that there's something connective even in the experiences you seek because of memories that are deeply embedded from like our generational kind of cultural paradigm, you know, thinking about
Yeah.
your idea of the 80s, idea of it being quite aspirational.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, I'm totally aware of that, and you're totally right. So if you grow up watching Marty McFly hang on to the back of a car on his skateboard, or Ferris Bueller take the day off, or Tom Hanks in Big, you don't easily shake those things, and they do imprint themselves in some way. And it did seem like freedom to a kid looking at that stuff.
That a lot of the references that we're talking about now are things from like a kind of late 1980s, very kind of North American culture. And actually, when I think about what you do, there's a particular kind of flavor, sensibility, and obviously an artist's signature. And there's something not anti-American, but definitely something other than the references we're using would suggest. What do you think you would say is your signature?
I don't know if it's a signature, but I do try and sort of remain critical of the sources or the things that come in. You know, it's not just a sort of roll over and accept. It's not always sort of celebratory, you know, and I do try and, you know, I am opinionated about things, and I don't shy away from sort of expressing that in the work, you know. So, you know, but I'm happy to have a good time skating around Selfridges. But at the same time, you know, like the Denver train station, you touched on that. But what people don't know is I walked away from the project. I spent 2 years designing that train station, and it was the biggest gig of my life, like the dream project. And I just hung the phone up and never spoke to them again.
Was that really because of the bureaucracy of having to work with
No.
like the bells of a big institution or a political system that wasn't?
No, I designed the most amazing train station. Like, it was all, I 3D rendered it. It was all in VR. Like, the effort we put was insane. It would have been the best project. It would have been a dream. But they kept saying to me things like, obviously, yeah, it's very bureaucratic. You've got the city and you've got the transport authority, whatever. And they were saying to me things like, well, what if there's quite a lot of drug users in the downtown area? What if they use these seats? And what if there's a big homeless community down there? What if they start populating these lovely soft benches that you're making? What if skateboarders do X, Y, and Z? And they were starting to sort of co-opt the design elements that I was coming up with to be, you know, what I'd call hostile. And it started to really, really wind me up. And it just ended with me literally saying on this conference call, you can't do it, you can't make me do it, I'm not going to do it. And I just put the phone down, and that was the end of it.
I do think it's fascinating that, I mean, my reason for speaking with you this evening is that I had the very happy encounter with you where I met you in person in Giant Gallery when we're obviously in Bournemouth, the Bournemouth area. And what I notice about that, by the way, it's not because I don't want to talk about Giant. I would love to talk about Giant as a venture, but it's also that I'm very aware that on your press junket, you've talked to really the world already so many times about this extraordinary venture that you're launching. But what I am interested in context of thinking about you hanging up the phone or the conference call about the station in Denver is the fact that when you go to Giant in Bournemouth and you're walking through Bournemouth Square, there's a massive community of people who are homeless right outside the door. And there's no pretension or movement away from that. There's no security guard coming out of the Giant entrance saying, you know, move along now. You're really right in the middle of this quite well, for Bournemouth anyway, quite a frenetic sense that there's a bit of push and pull between perhaps semi-brain dead tourists who've just happened in that space, and then people who opted in, and people who also live there. Like the town centre is their home. And it's all happening all at once. And it's a huge kind of melting pot or mix of people. Did you choose this location because you thought that would be a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. On that very street, actually my studio's now on that street further up. I have a sort of quite large art studio now up there. Yeah. But underneath the studio on the same street is this bench, this hostile bench that I did the project all about. And I noticed they put these bars on the benches to deter rough sleepers from using them. And no, I'm totally aware of where it is and what's going on there. It's not a coincidence there's a twice life-size homeless person sat in the middle of the gallery, you know.
Well, I mean, one of the questions I wrote down when I was prepping for this is, how does your sense of place play into your sense of community? So turning it around the other way for a minute. So we're thinking about a sense of community, kind of like defining a place that you want to be. But round the other way, if we think about how your sense of place feeds into a community that perhaps you might build, I suppose. Do you think that you have a part in building community through these actions or activities?
No, I don't think so. I think what it's about is about making a space where the community can build themselves and the freedom to collide in whatever way it has to happen. You know, I'm sort of increasingly interested in sort of making places or spaces or situations where things can happen, and then I get out of the way. It's absolutely not about me. It can't be. That's not the idea. So it's about starting something off. I think if anything, I'm more of a sort of founder than a continual doer. I kind of set things up and then kind of wander off.
So founder, not facilitator, or is the facilitation and the founding of the thing and then that's it, done? Disappear.
No, it's not that it's not that there's no responsibility or there's no love or care afterwards. It's not like a complete kind of abandonment, but there has to be a point where you kind of take the stabilizers off the thing and you let it be its own, what it needs to be. You can't dominate the direction or something like that. It's not up to me, you know.
It is something I find so interesting with your persona, because I don't know you personally. I've met you once, and what I see is the persona, and I don't know if the persona is the same as someone else who occupies the space behind the persona. Of course, perhaps we're all doing that. I mean, I even know in my teaching life, perhaps the gap between me and my persona shrinks back as I get older. I'm less afraid to just be myself, maybe.
Well,
are you finding?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, you know, when you get some degree of people knowing who you are, which I sort of seem to have developed over time, that persona is constructed for you. You know, you'll do an interview and you answer the questions you're asked based on what people have heard before. So this sort of, it's less of a persona, more of like a patina that sticks to you over time. It's incredibly frustrating, and it's an odd thing to live with, because actually it's a millimetre thick, and underneath it is something else. And speaking from a very personal level, there's actually it's quite traumatic to have to occupy that all the time. It's not necessarily fun or useful or something that you would choose to have to be or act or do. And you know, I've never sort of been shy about showing what I am, but it's not always possible, you know.
I'm just going to share a photograph that you sent to me.
Yeah.
When do you think your persona started? When did it start its machination towards world domination? The Stuart Semple that we know now? Was it?
No, I mean,
was it embryonic here?
I don't know. I mean, I think there I am with my granddad, who we made things. So this is how I started making stuff, and I discovered the joy for creating. And my granddad had a garage, and we used to call it the garage that had everything, because there'd always be some wood or something that we could make, and we would make like magic tricks and bird tables. And my job was always to paint the things that we made, of course, you know, whether we made a chess set or whatever. And he was just like my best friend, and we just made stuff after school every weekend. And you know, I miss him. And I think at that age I fell in love with making stuff. You know, there was no idea of like getting known for doing that or anything like that. It was just the joy of, you know, doing that. So no, I don't think I was thinking about that, anything like that then.
No, I wonder always with people, anyone, whether they're an artist or something different in their chosen path, where it comes from. You know, the idea of persona is so interesting that, you know, we, as you're saying, that it's like we're not Teflon coated, stuff sticks to us that's projected onto us from other places. And especially when you're in the public domain and you become the thing in the projections of other people that they've projected onto you, of course, over time as well, it becomes kind of fixed or hardened almost. But
Yeah.
in the case of really moving through, I guess, one's life, the experiences that we have, of course, shape us, we know that, but I'm just wondering about the artist in you as a child, how, or whether that artist, does that artist remain? Is it a different thing now? Has it by necessity become shaped by an external thing, or is there still this core?
No, I don't think it's changed. I think that I think there's something inherent behind all of it. There's an intrinsic something that needs to be expressed, and I don't really think it's any different in the child. In fact, it's, you know, Picasso's the great example of trying to work like a child at the end of his life, of course. But you know, that's like the Holy Grail, like that. And then, of course, the world piles up its things and the responsibility of whatever, and then it's a process of undoing, isn't it? And taking things off and getting back to the core of that, and not forgetting that, despite where the world pulls you and what you need to do. But the thing is, at the end of the day, you need some degree of freedom, some degree of autonomy to be able to do that. And
a lovely quote came, maybe it was yesterday. I have like I'm on the mailing list for daily quote by Krishnamurti.
Oh, nice.
Learning is not additive. I would really love to go into that more. I'd like to speak to you about that more. I mean, we don't have time here right now, but this idea also that if learning isn't additive, or if we can inquire into that together.
I mean, yeah, we can talk about that all day long. So I'm obsessed with him. I've been looking at Brockwood for my son, actually, and I think his whole approach to education is very, very interesting.
A bit later, when you were self-teaching in the bowels of Borders bookstore in Bournemouth.
Yeah.
What came out of that period, really? I mean, this is early work, but it's not that early, is it?
Well, I think it is for me. So this, I think I'm not, I think I'm like, well, it says 2021, but I think that's when I saved the image. So this is actually the year 2000, on the cusp, like the very end of 1999, this is made. And at this point, I was studying at Bretton Hall in Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and I had a near-death experience from an allergy. So I sort of quit college, moved to Bournemouth, not knowing when I would die or not, because they couldn't tell me what I was allergic to. And I couldn't speak. My mouth was all swollen up, I think. And I got this old wallpaper paste table out of the garden shed and some household paints and some oil pastels, and I made that. And, you know, it's not a great painting. It's almost a bit embarrassing to look at it, but it's the first painting I'd made, because it was just radically different than anything else. I wasn't copying anybody. It was just me saying what I had to say at that time about what I was going through. And whether I had the vocabulary to do that effectively or not is another question. But I felt catharsis for the first time from making art. And it changed everything for me after doing that. I got it. Something went off in my head. And then I started making these, and then yes, I went to the Borders bookshop every day, and I read all morning, and then I made art all afternoon for about 3 years.
An interesting time to be doing that, though. I mean, the early 2000s, kind of seismic shifts in so many ways for our age, who you've talked before about, like a legacy of having war generation grandparents, parents who'd kind of grown up in that, like the collectivism of fear that was then passed down through us, and even things like in our education systems when you and I were little kids, you know, the Charlie campaign, don't talk to strangers, and of course don't talk to strangers. I'm not advocating to my daughter go and talk to a stranger, but the way that our kind of culture has delivered to us how to do things has only ever been through how to not do things, because they're
Totally.
scary and they're dangerous.
Yeah.
And your work is very filled, I always think, with a not bitterness. I don't mean that you're bitter, but there's a sharpness, the edge. There's like a blade underneath the squishy surface.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I'm glad you see it. It sort of frustrates me when people don't, and they just think they're pretty pictures. You know, quite often I'll be at a gallery show and a collector will go, "Oh, that's really nice. I love the colours on that one. Can you tell me what it's about?" And then about 3 minutes later, they're like, "Oh my God." You know, and the dealer's like pulling me away from them because they don't want to buy it anymore. You know.
No, I mean, I would be surprised to think that anybody looking wouldn't see that there is the darkness.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? It's pretty obvious to me. But
Yeah, but that darkness, sometimes in reading other interviews with you, the darkness, perhaps whether it's by the interviewer or through what you've said in their interpretation of it, it kind of seems to be coming from an external place. Whereas in this earlier work, and anything that I can garner about your sort of Nancyboy period, for example, that's an inner darkness that's becoming
oh yeah,
externalized. What would you say about that?
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think it was totally, I mean, I was terrified. I nearly died. I flatlined. I'd said goodbye to my family. I'd quit art school. They told me I was allergic to 55 things, but they couldn't tell me which of those would kill me next. So here's a young man, 19 years old, locked in a house, scared to go in the outside world. That's inherited all these fears from all over the place. But I didn't know that. I didn't understand the sociology of the thing at that time. I just knew that I was melting down and that I felt this pressure and I needed to get it out somehow. And then art was there. That was it. But then as the vocabulary grew, as I understood more, as I looked more, I realized that there was a sort of societal level of this anxiety, of this subcontext of fear, this background noise of fear that was inherited and passed down and perhaps eroded, and maybe the source had been disguised. And then I started to pick it apart in a more sort of universal language rather than what I felt, specifically.
I was listening the other day to a really, really interesting podcast on Luminary. It's the Russell Brand Under the Skin series. And it's an slightly older one. I can't remember the man's name. He's a professor of ecology at Reading. I know he's a professor of ecology. He was actually talking about the science of the self, or of self. And he was talking about, and forgive me, people listening, and forgive me, Stuart, if I get this a little bit wrong, because I'm not a scientist and the language is a bit in my mind, but he was talking almost like at a molecular level, how there's both interchange, exchange, and for want of a better word, like a collaboration between everything. And I don't want to say it's like the butterfly effect, because it wasn't even that he was saying. Okay. But where we've bred, and I think you've spoken to this point before as well, about a culture of ego and individualism.
Yeah.
Is that actually what we need to understand is that even scientifically, we can prove that every single part of us is actually part of collective, communal, shared availability, mix,
Yeah.
mash, share.
Yeah.
And I think of that when I think of your work. Here we have
Wow.
you as an artist. I can't remember where I heard you speaking about it, but you were talking about like filling up your little paint pots and sending them out. And that when someone then uses a paint that's come from you, that then becomes a collaborative painting.
Mm.
And that it's still part of almost like the
Yeah.
the underpinning part of painting
Mm.
is as one, really.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
some people listening might think this is terribly naff, and we've gone, I don't know, esoteric and
Why
way.
is it naff? I mean, what if it's the truth of the thing, though? You know, what if it's the truth of the thing? I mean, you know, if you're in the flow of creativity, you start to realise that these ideas might not be individualised, and I'm beginning to really start to see that now. You know that no, there's definitely more to it than that. And certainly on a cultural level, you know, like look at the pandemic, you know, 100% the level of fear has risen across the whole population during the pandemic. I don't think anyone could argue with that.
Well, I mean, the next image I have is this emotional baggage. I'm actually going to come back to this because I just want to make
Okay.
this one up
Go on then.
and say that, you know, were like you attuned to some strange universal oracle that was telling you we were going to go into a pandemic and that actually our bomb is COVID and that will bring us together? I found it most extraordinary. People out on their doorsteps, banging on their pots and pans, shouting, whistling, cheering. Thank you, NHS. There was extraordinary beauty in that. But isn't it so shameful that the vehicle we found to get there on is something that is so, in many ways, treacherous and
Yeah,
divisive?
but it takes that, you know, it's like this. I mean, this is obviously a Smith's lyric, but it's absolutely true. You know, it's like after those decades, you know, whoever you stand politically, whatever, but after those decades of Thatcher, you know, Princess Diana's death was what united the nation, wasn't it? You know, that collective mourning. It's a really strange moment. There's not too dissimilar for the banging of the pots and pans. It's a very similar sort of reaction from a public, I think.
It's quite archetypal, primitive, primal stuff going on in it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
In terms of making art, I mean, do you see art as a, you have said that you think that expression is a birthright.
Too right, yeah.
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 I mean, art, your Paleolithic ancestors, you know, probably daubing some stuff on a wall in a cave. Is it the same? What do you think? Is it the same need for expression?
Yeah, it's just our concerns grew.
Same.
You know, they didn't have atom bombs, did they? We walked over here and we found this animal and then we brought it back, and that's their news, that's their world, that's what they need to convey. You know, we sent a sound to the other tribe, they took it back. You know, we're just doing the same thing. It's just writing on a wall, isn't it?
You and Anish Kapoor sending a little smoke signal here and there.
Yeah, that's it. It's not like, you know, none of this is weird. You know, I think it's just what humans do, isn't it? I think it's very normal.
Do you not find it interesting? Sometimes people are so surprised that all it is really a want to connect. And you've used the word generosity. I often use the word kindness when I'm thinking about art, and I do in all my other little films. People will know I do talk about artist generosity, like the want to share. Again, it's like sitting around the kind of campfire and telling the story. I mean, that's our art making process. What's excellent in what you do is that you are actively and not passively inviting people often to participate.
Yeah.
That's something that other artists don't necessarily do, apart from through looking.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, it depends the level of interactivity or action, you know, but I think it depends where you're looking. I mean, it really comes down to compassion and empathy, though, because if you really care about the audience, I mean, actually care, then maybe you want to invite more than looking. I think maybe you actually see that you could actually provide more than that experience. Although there's nothing wrong with looking. A lot happens through looking. I mean, we can't dismiss the potency of looking, but participating is a different thing. It's a lot more active.
When you're supposedly just looking, though, do you believe that you have a very deep or a deeper level of participation through looking anyway, naturally as an artist?
Me personally, I probably look in a way other people don't, I think. And one of the great experiences of my life actually was I got to see the Van Gogh exhibition at the Royal Academy with Lucian Freud about 2 weeks before he died. And it was closed to the public. And I just don't know how it happened, whatever cosmic situation, but me and Lucian were walking through looking at these, you know, wonderful paintings. And he obviously knew he wasn't going to be here for very long. And I've never seen anybody look like that. It's like he was drinking it through his eyes, every last drop of it. And I've never seen anybody look like he looked at things. And it just stuck with me forever. And yeah, it was weird.
Here we are talking on this little funny thing, this little funny show, about the experience of looking through the experience of looking through somebody else's experience.
Looking at someone looking.
Yeah. I do love looking at people. I mean, have you ever done that? Like when I met you and I was trying to kind of pluck up the courage to come over and speak to you. In fact, quite a few of my friends think it's hilarious because I lost my nerve when I first spoke to you. I was, oh my God, this is ridiculous. I can't be speaking to this person. And I scuttled off and I got halfway up the hill towards
so
Zara.
weird.
No, but listen, it's funny. I got halfway up the hill to Zara, back to my car. And I said, you're so stupid. I really want to speak to that person. So I came back down the hill, back up the stairs into the gallery, and I came over to you again and I gave you my card. And
good. I'm glad you did. Yeah.
Well, no, I really had to catch myself on about it. But I found looking and observing people in your gallery in Bournemouth, in Giant Gallery, I mean, I would really love if you could give me a volunteer day to come in and be like a kind of...
Yeah, I'll be glad for it. We need help. Yes.
Come and like look at people and how what they do, like the behaviors of people in galleries are amazing to me.
Yeah.
I mean, have you spent a lot of time? What I was going to say is I watched you for a little while without being a weird stalker lady.
Yeah.
I was thinking, is he actually watching us looking?
Yeah, well, it's hard not to, right? I mean, you know, without being weird about it, but you spent all this time and effort making this thing, and you know, as you say, it's in a strange spot, right? You know, maybe it wouldn't be as fascinating to watch if it was in Bermondsey at the White Cube or something. I think we probably know what people are walking around thinking and talking about. But when you land something like that in the middle of Bournemouth, it's fascinating. I mean, how can you not be completely intrigued by how people are? Yeah. So, you know, I don't sort of sit there all the time.
That even though in days of old Russell Coates, with the permanent display of paintings, again, the idea that, you know, I'm lumping all you holiday makers in together, but, you know, you would sit in there or I would sit in there for quite a long time and I'd watch people approaching paintings. And they were there really by accident and maybe because it was raining. And almost like the practice of looking at art for people who are not used to looking at art is sometimes it can be quite a sad thing.
Oh, it worries me. I think people have forgotten how to look, and I think it's moving image that's done it. I've thought about this a lot, and I just think that, like, cinema, you know, you've got 30 frames a second, it's all CGI, it's big budget, it's all written by probably code to keep you stimulated and excited, and you know, it's hard to do that with a still image, with a painting, really, and people don't give it the time.
You were telling me about some of your other references and sort of things that you enjoy and that you yeah, that you've maybe been a bit inspired by. You mentioned Gus Van Sant and like Harmony Korine, and I think about going to the cinema with all my friends age 18 to see Kids when it first came out.
Yeah.
And I mean, really coming out the cinema in the centre of Glasgow and thinking we're not actually that different from any of those people. And the reason why I mention it in context of like painting and perhaps still or not moving forms of art is that maybe when something's really immersive, although there's a movement into an immersion, there's also a stillness within it. And give me a moment because I'll come up on my question. I wonder when you are somebody who intentionally makes kind of collaborative work, or especially for you, installation work that must be participated in order to kind of receive the benefit of your practice with it. Do you hope that people find a sort of still point in the turning world through what you do, or is it that you want to always have an agitation, that you want us always to move and to be super stimulated?
No, I don't think there's sort of an intention towards either of those things in the installation work, because the installation work is often very interactive. So it's about, probably, you know, we're looking at the baggage drop here, and it really is about two members of the general public coming in contact with each other, and inside this thing there's like a little eye hole, and they can't see each other, but they get eye contact through a hole. And one says to the other, you know, what emotional baggage do you want to leave? And they share a burden, you know. So I mean, you know, there's perhaps not a still point whilst the activity is happening, but things like this set off little chain reactions that sort of settle over time, I think. But I think you know, it's a bit sort of strange, but I think in the paintings, I might be pointing at something that's incredibly silent and incredibly still underneath it, or at least in the latest stuff I've been doing, it's sort of leading back to something. But you can only point at it.
Even in this though, you know, this is a portal to Stuart Semple proper, let's say. And if somebody accesses it, of course, they can only access it through their prism of understanding and experience. Nonetheless, do you hope they reach you?
I hope they understand me to some extent. But I think it's more universal than me. So I'm kind of not pointing at myself.
Okay.
I think. But maybe it's different with different work.
I did wonder about it, about the paint, and this idea that Stuart Semple fires himself out into the world a million times over. It's kind of like a sleeper cell of Stuart Temple.
I don't know, maybe it's just pain.
I know. This one, crime scene.
I liked this one. This was fun.
Fun and sad.
Yeah, really sad, tragic, yeah.
Can you tell me, actually, you did send me another image and it was flowers laid at the window.
Yeah, so it was kind of like, it became like, you know, the government don't like the arts, we all understand that. And there was that meme going around that we should retrain and reskill and reboot. And there's the picture of the ballerina. And then there were, you know, it turned out that actually that was ages ago. So they hadn't really done it. But it didn't really matter because the sentiment's the same from them as far as I'm concerned. So they're not off the hook. So it's absolutely fine. So I thought, you know, we should speak about this. So I made this artist job centre in the middle of London, just went up there, took me about a week, just did it off the cuff, recreated this sort of very 90s sort of trashy job centre with jobs that you'd never really want, you know, ballpoint pen tester, crime scene washer, potato counter. But what happened was that it became a bit like a remembrance site, and people started putting flowers outside and adding little pictures of like things from the arts that meant something to them.
Can I say also that, I mean, for people watching, this also kind of came about through the pandemic as well. You know, it wasn't what I would think of as a kind of more normal time in our recent history. So you know, it does have that little intercom, doesn't it?
Yeah, so you could press the intercom to apply for a job, because obviously that had to be shut because it was the pandemic. And the sad thing was people were pressing it.
It's so mournful, my goodness.
It really is. And people were pressing the buzzer and they were like, I'm a concert violinist. I've been playing all over the world for 15 years. Is the ballpoint pen presser job still available? Because all my work's been cancelled. I mean, it was literally, I wasn't expecting it to be real, but it was real. Like, the arts really got hammered.
Well, I mean, you know, I speak to Bill Wadman every week on you're seeing, and you know, reporting from his mainstay. He lives in Brooklyn, going into Manhattan, seeing, you know, the theatres are all shut. We started a small project with dancers who weren't working, unable to work. You'll kill me if I get this wrong, but that's the essence of it. Is there were just so many people who were suddenly unable to, it's not just earn their money, it's, I guess, find their form or utilize their form.
Yeah.
If they were artists.
Who they are. I mean, what if it is your identity? You know, what if you are a ballet dancer? What if you are a painter? I mean, that's brutal. It's destroying you as a human, isn't it?
And just go back to the idea about, well, you sent me a collection of things again that inspire you. Harmony Korine and Kerouac, and always kind of left of center, offbeat, underdog, amazingness. And those are threads, aren't they? They kind of like, they have commonalities across all those things, regardless of what era they're from.
Yeah, I suppose they do, yeah.
When you think about your work, and without meaning to memorialize you, because you're certainly not dead yet, that
no, hopefully not.
What are the strands? What are your threads? You know, if I'm going to say, right, you know, you've said Gus Van Sant, Harmony Korine, Kerouac, beat poets, even the stuff that, again, is maybe perhaps more esoteric, the Ram Dass stuff we spoke about just before we started recording, an interleaving there of many things. What are you interleaved with?
Personally, I don't know. I think it's a difficult question, isn't it? Because, you know, I don't know how fixed it is, but I think, you know, obviously society, you know, like I'm literally obsessed with the ebbs and flows of that. That's a huge sort of strand. And then the idea of anxiety and freedom, you know, I never get away from that. Whatever I've made, somehow it's about freedom in some respect. And then, you know, this sort of underdog thing is definitely in there, but I wonder if that's because your heroes would always be an underdog, really, or at least for me. I'd only ever really look up to someone who, I don't know, I don't know if I could really sort of. That's a good question. I don't know. It's a thought.
It's something I consider. I mean, we've said now the same word many times actually in this conversation, which is fixed. I'm not certain, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I get the impression that perhaps we share a sense of fixed, which is that nothing is.
Well, I totally agree with that. You know, I totally agree. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to make tomorrow.
But in the communication, you know, about work, for example, the work, in so many ways, we have to fix things down in order to then go on to communicate about them in other ways.
Yeah.
So like the inceptive thing itself is a moment in time. And again, you've said somewhere before, I think, about this idea that, you know, painting is a really slow way of fixing time. Yet, and this comes back to a Ram Dass thing that I'll read in a second, you know, there's Stuart Semple or Sandi Robertson in a moment making a photograph or making a painting or building an installation. And energetically, is there something that's retained about the moment? But is there anything retained actually about Stuart Semple or Sandi Robertson. Like, it's legacy,
oh,
but
well, I mean, it depends, doesn't it? I mean, the goal is that there isn't, right? I mean, if you've done it right, I mean, Warhol doesn't want to be there,
nope.
but Warhol is there and he can't eliminate himself. And that really baffles me. So, you know, ultimately you don't want to be there. But if I don't show up and build the job centre, do I think maybe someone else would have done it?
But also,
I mean,
you know, are you ever actually considering that this art making is a process of erasure?
well, yeah, because I made a painting. I wish I'd sent it to you. It's called I Was Never There.
Yeah.
And it's loads of dots. It's like a pontillist roadscape, and it just says I was never there on it. And it took about 9 months to paint this thing, and then at the end I just painted over it white, and you can just see the vague sense that there was something there. And yeah, I think that's there is some of that in it.
I'm just going to read this thing that comes out of this amazing book. Anybody? Stuart and I both. Is it okay for me to say we both love this book? Be Here Now, Ram Dass. It's the bit that said there's writing happening. Maybe that's hard for you to understand. I'm here, but I am not here. I'm writing, but I am not writing. Inside of me in the heart cave is a mantra going on that reminds me who I really am.
Wow.
Is this you with art making?
I wish, God, if I could get out of the way that much, that would be brilliant. No, I'm not at that point. God, I wish I was. But, you know, my heroes do that. Bob Dylan doesn't write songs, but songs happen, or at least when he was younger. John Lennon does that. I think Rauschenberg, Cy Twombly does that.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, there's lots of things in, you know, for me, one of my big kind of loves in painting that happens to seem quite fixed because it's something that has never changed in terms of the level of my passion for it is Mark Tobey, the kind of loose collective under the umbrella term of US mid-century abstract expressionist painters. Like an idea that, you know, are we vessels? Are we conduits? Well, you know, what the hell are we? It doesn't matter. We're nothing, actually. And yet here's this thing that comes out, and our right to expression, as you say, is our birthright. We're intended to be able to express. Yet the we or the I, in all great things, it seems, that I can see that aren't from me or about me, or where that the I has been completely let go, or perhaps isn't there when the thing has happened. I wonder how that reconciles with this kind of work, because this work is sometimes struggle, isn't it? But
yeah, well, this is
itself collective struggle.
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to be universal. It's not about me. I mean, I'm not here. You can't see a trace of me there, I don't think, or at least I'd hope there isn't.
Well, no, hang on a second. Look at those very vibrantly coloured post-it thingies, and you know. There we go.
Okay, I suppose, yeah. So it's inevitably impossible, but I do sort of buy, like, I read this thing that Michael Jackson said about Billie Jean, and he was on an aeroplane. It was like 2 a.m, and he got the whole bass line to Billie Jean in his head, and then he landed at the airport, rang up Quincy Jones, went straight to the studio, and the reason why he had to record it that night is because he firmly believed if he didn't record it, Prince would get the message and record it. So he believed it wasn't him that wrote that bass line, and if he didn't respond to the call, Prince would do it. And I think it's that stuff.
Well, I mean, there's loads of evidence, isn't there? And again, I talked to you about that podcast I was listening to. I just found the name, actually. It was Professor Tom Oliver, if anyone is interested in stuff about collectivism. The idea that, you know, there's so many, for example, patents, where people filed for patents on the same day of some extraordinary thing. that's now hugely useful and amazing in our everyday lives. I think he mentioned something like the thermometer or something. So many people came up with that at the same time. And we hear heaps about collective consciousness and so on. I just wonder why we don't really embrace it.
Yeah, that's the thing that I don't understand, because I get ideas for things and I sort of sit there and I go, why isn't anybody doing it? But why haven't they done it? But it's so obvious. It's quite strange, and you sort of wait and it sort of doesn't happen. And I don't know if it's a fear thing, or people don't realize they can, or there's an encouragement missing, or just this idea of self-expression itself is not championed, or I don't know.
I think we're shamed about our self-expression as well, though. You know, we're shamed almost like publicly. It's too introspective, it's self-indulgent.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it was just my childhood, but I'd run downstairs after drawing something and show my mum and go, look what I've done. And she'd go, oh, very good. And I think that we do have a natural instinct to like make something and go, look what I made. You know, and I don't, or at least I did. I don't know.
I luckily, me too. You know, I was never put off being interested in art. So lucky.
Yeah.
I do find in a mainstream environment, especially I have to say in the south of England, bizarrely, that there's a sense that it's in a culture where like money and bling is celebrated. Other forms of expression that are maybe filled with a different kind of integrity, those are the things that are batted back, or people are quite suspicious of them, maybe.
Yeah, I think it is a Southern thing. I don't think they understand what a creative class is. You know, I think, you know, probably most of them see me looking a bit scruffy and thinking that I'm trouble or going to steal something. You know, I get followed around the supermarket as if I'm going to nick stuff. You know, I'm just an artist, I'm no trouble. But I think there are prejudices around it in the education system, for sure. You know more about that than me, but yeah, it rings all the way from the highest government down, doesn't it? And that's how it is.
Stuart, thank you. I'm really aware that you've given me lots of your time.
Oh, it's been really lovely.
I'm also aware that, you know, probably haven't mentioned most of the things that I should have mentioned. I suspect, well, maybe I could get like a gold star for being the only person in recent history who's not asked you.
You definitely get a gold star for that. Yes.
And can I just say before we finish, it's not because those things aren't important, but it's just that I know that you've spoken so widely about them. And I think people are so interested in what you're doing that they don't need to listen to me talking to you about that to get the fullness of that in other places.
Yeah, but no, it's been really lovely to actually just talk about other stuff and like the actual work and what's going on. So it's been really good. So thank you.
Well, I really appreciate you lending me your time, speaking to me, but really speaking, I hope, to some students and maybe some other watchers, listeners on YouTube. Thank you.
It was a pleasure.